This is More Than Money with Mapalo Maku, brought to you by Sasfin Wealth.
Welcome to More Than Money. I'm Mapalo Maku, a personal finance columnist, and I love having money conversations that change people's perspective about finances. Why am I doing this podcast, you might ask? To talk about money. Not the paper stuff. I mean the baggage, the feeling, the emotional, heart-wrenching stuff. We find this conversation so uncomfortable to have, which is why on this podcast, I have decided to have this very difficult conversations. We are going to have some difficult discussions because better money conversations lead to better money confidence. And healthy money dialogue leads to healthy money decisions. Today, I'm joined by Tlhompho Mokoena, who is the founder and president of the restaurant, The Wing Republic, which specializes in gourmet chicken wings. Oh my goodness, I'm hungry already. And he is also a qualified marketer with a distinguished corporate career. So, sir, please tell me, a distinguished career in corporate, why did you start Wing Republic?
I was raised by a single parent, so I've always been an entrepreneur, selling this and that, just to generate extra income. So my mother used to work at, I won't mention the company's name, she used to buy like factory fault stuff from the company.
Yeah.
And then we'd sell it in the township, So being an entrepreneur has always been me. Because my mother always said, get a degree, do some. So I went through the get this, as mommy has instructed. But at some point I was like, cool. I've done this, I've ticked those boxes, so let me just do my own thing.
So you go through the stream of, okay, finish a degree, get yourself a degree, and you work in corporate, right? What was that decision like? Was it you cut off completely from corporate and you go do your own thing? How did you go about that transition?
So here's a crazy story. So I go through varsity, I qualify, top of my class, young marketer of the year, get offered this job. So I started my first job, I think as far back as 2005.
Yes.
So I work and I study. And at some point, I'm like, I just want to own an ad agency because it was like the coolest thing ever. And by default, after I'd quit a job at Metro, I used to work at Metro. So the job was hectic. So we used to work Monday to Sunday pretty much, So I get this job quite easy Monday to Friday. I go out this one time in 2014. And the next morning, I want something spicy. And my wife's like, no, let's go to a friend of ours really owns a market in Soweto called Low Crate.
Yeah.
Then it's also one of her friends' birthdays. She's like, cool, let's go check this place out. I get to this market and I walk around looking for something spicy.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, So that in itself was like lights on. So I call my mother, I'm like, hey, I went to this market and no one is selling chicken and no one is selling stuff that we can relate to.
Yeah.
That's when the idea kicked in. I had you asked me this in 2014, in June, would I get into the food business? I would have said no.
Yeah.
So literally this was a chance encounter. And I then spoke to the guy, can you give me a stall? He says, cool, sharp, I'll give it to you on the next market, which was the 6th of September, 2014. I get to this market, get my mother, and literally we're just selling chicken wings. And hence the name, The Wing Republic. We just sell chicken wings and gradually move from this one market. I mean, naturally people that do markets and events, they go to other markets to see who's selling what, And gradually we started doing a lot more markets and we got into events. And I was still a marketing manager. But over the weekends, I'd be selling this chicken wings, and gradually the business grew, like from events and markets, and I was still holding down 9 to 5. But at some point, I also did a calculation. I was making decent amounts of money as this thing was a side hustle. And in comparison to my 9 to 5, I still have to shower, I need to go to work, do reports and come back home. Like when you compare the logistics and the cost implication, I'm like, this is more like 8 days a week, really, because like Saturday, Sunday, 4 times. And obviously people would be, we want to get your wings. Where do we get them outside of this market and event? And the seed was planted, And at that time I started toying with the idea of maybe I could open a shop. Maybe I could do something,
Yeah.
And because I've always been a risk taker, especially when it comes to business, I got a shop. I mean, I think it was an old restaurant and the lady was leaving, got in, signed the lease and gradually worked on shop fittings and all of those things. And at that time, I still work.
Yeah.
So the day that I opened my shop, which was on the 2nd of November, 2017, I was handing in my resignation because I figured, let me just give it a try. I mean, it has worked so far with me doing it as a side hustle. Let me give it the energy and maybe something will come out of it. And indeed, something came out of it, you know?
So you mentioned that it was you and your mom. Do you have any other siblings?
I've got 3 siblings, yeah.
And your mom was a single parent.
Yeah.
What were the conversations about money?
You know, my mother's favorite saying is, "Chelete ya sebeletsa," you know? So I grew up understanding, or in order for me to get to the next level, or in order for me to get this money, I need to work hard for this money, you know?
Yeah.
So between me and my siblings, there's a 9-year gap. So I've always been close with my mother. She's always been supportive. So the conversation with my mother has always been that if it works for you, keep going, you know, because she's seen it. I mean, I started the business with her selling besides me at events. So she's seen the growth from us getting an unbranded gazebo, for example, from macro, which was a red gazebo selling, to getting a branded gazebo, getting a shop, getting a food truck. So she's seen the progress, you know, but she's always been supportive in every single thing that I've done.
You were growing up. Now you have this age gap of 9 years. What conversations did you and your mom and your siblings as well? Because now the dynamics are quite different. You have, you're the oldest brother, and now you have siblings that you feel, perhaps I also need to lend in a hand at home. When you were working, did you have to support your siblings as well, or your mom held the fort down and she was okay?
Yeah, I had to. I mean, I took my younger sister through her tertiary qualification, you know. I've always supported everyone. I guess, you know what they say with firstborns, once we are deputy parents. So it's always been that, you know. I mean, today it's still the same. I mean, my sister would call me and say, "Hey, I need your help with XYZ."
And how do you deal with that? I think especially in the beginning of you starting your company, how do you balance being able to give your siblings and support your mom and making sure that you stay afloat as well?
So here's the thing, because it's always been a family business. So my sister used to work with me, my brother used to work with me. So if it comes to money, they used to work for the money. I think with me as well, it's like, it's a family business. Everyone has to benefit.
Yeah.
I mean, my brother worked for me as well. My sister worked for me. And then she was like, "Cool, I've studied stomatology. I just want to do what I'm passionate about."
Yeah.
It's really a non-issue in our case. Because, I mean, if you want money, you come work at the shop and that's it. There's no give me.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. Even my kids. I mean, my youngest kid was on holiday.
Yeah.
So he wanted a pair of sneakers. So he worked for 2.5 weeks and he bought himself those sneakers.
Wow, that is incredible.
So it's literally what I've always taught everyone around me. So if you want it, like, I think your initial question was, what was the conversation about money? So I think I'm also trying to teach even my kids to say, if you want it, we work for it, you get it.
So I just want to go back to your first paycheck in marketing. Do you remember what you did with it?
I gave it to my grandmother.
You gave it to your grandmother? All of it?
All of it. So there's this thing, man. You know, with your first job, because I grew up in a single parent household, so I was close with my mother and my grandmother.
Yes.
So much so that to this day I call my mother by first name. And my late grandmother was me. I was excited, I was happy, and I was like, "Me, Rasebi, and now it's there, you know." And she'll be like, "Okay, cool, Kia transport," but the bulk of it went to my grandmother.
What was that feeling like for you when you gave her your first paycheck?
It's genuinely a great feeling, you know.
Yeah.
The fact that these people have raised me, and these people have gotten me to where I am today,
Yeah.
and now I'm contributing back to the same family that I am what I am because of them. You know what I mean? So it's a really dope feeling.
What has been your not so proud moment when it comes to money so far?
So for the longest time, because I've always wanted to help people.
Yeah.
I used to be the kind of person that people come to. Like, "Hey, I need your help with this, you know, I need your help with," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've learned, Lena, over there is that, you know, it's the same people that borrow from you that you can't do the same when you are stuck, you know. So that has been a not so proud moment, because I've also had to learn to say no, because it's not me, you know. But I mean, amongst other things, buying sneakers that you don't wear and you keep them at home, you know. So I mean, buying cars, you know, sometimes you get excited, I got money, and you buy a car. I mean, before, when I used to work at a 9 to 5, because now I was making money as a marketing manager, I was making money as a side hustle.
Yeah.
So I got in a buy BMW. Happiness all around. 7 months later, I need funding to fund this restaurant that I have in Brampfontein.
Yeah.
I had to get rid of that car. There were penalties. There was, you know what I mean? So also not so... I was proud when I got it because it's a dream car. But then, because of the journey that I've now undertaken as an entrepreneur, wasn't a wise move. You know? So there's been a lot of incidences where you're like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But I mean, I've also had to learn and adjust. I mean, I am human after all, you know?
Sounds like also you're the type of person who adapts very quickly.
I mean, someone could have said, I'm going to hold on to my BMW for dear life because what will people think of me, number one? And that I was driving this car and now I have to let it go. And also to go with the pretense that I do have money. I can start a business, go for funding and still hold on to my BMW. So why was that decision so easy for you?
Here's my logic, right? With this business, it's really my legacy. It's the legacy for me, for my kids and all of those things.
Yeah.
So I always go back to, will my kids remember that our dad drove a BMW in 2014? I'll give you a simple example. Recently, I just closed one of my stores in Durban. So it wasn't doing bad, but it wasn't generating money, So again, I could have been caught with, closing a shop. People would think, Kiwil or whatever,
Yeah.
But because I always look at the bigger picture, we are building for the future, we are building for the future. So if there's anything else that we need to cut off so that the business can live for another 2 years, can live for another 3 years, because that's what it's about. Keep it going for as long as you can. So that, my kids, the twin boys are now 13.
Yeah.
Who knows when they 18, they might take over. Now there's not one Tlhompho, there's 2 Tlhomphos.
Yeah.
When the young one is also 18, there's now 4 Tlhomphos. Do you get what I mean? So it's always been a bigger picture thing, So you can't be caught up with the now, So I need to drive a BM now, I need to look fancy now. But is it going to benefit me in 5 years' time?
My family.
Do you get what I mean? Is it going to benefit me in 5 years' time? So I think that was really the logic, and I always apply the same logic. Is it going to benefit me? Is it going to benefit the business 5 years from now? And if it doesn't benefit the business, we cut it off and we readjust, adapt, and we move on. And I think that's what entrepreneurship is about, really and truly, When you see an opportunity, you try and exploit it. And if it doesn't work, you find something else and you move along. Because, if you look at a lot of white-owned establishment,
yes,
it's intergenerational. It's probably started by the granddad, the father ran it, and now the kids run it, So and when I say we as black people, we don't really have a lot of stories like that, We don't have a lot of stories where, this thing was started by Ntate Mogolo thing, and how the business has continued. And that's why I think our earlier conversation before the interview was, are you paying your tax? We're talking about tax, And for me, it's always been there that you got to formalize this thing and it has to run like a formal business so that it's got the opportunity to at least grow,
To
it's
go
not
to
run
the next
by
level.
Correct, because half the time, I've seen stories. I grew up in a similar story where my grandfather used to own taxis back in the day in Togoza. And when my granddad passed away, he went with his business. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of stories. You can go anywhere. People will tell you, Ndadomola used to have the Cressida or whatever, but now those businesses are gone. So I'm trying to formalize so that I'm not the only person that understands and runs it, but everyone else understands how it's run so that they can take it to the next level.
Of course, when you're teaching your kids about anything in life, it's never the moment where you sit them down and say, I'm teaching you this and this. They learn through action, right? So what do you think you are actively teaching them currently in terms of business, in terms of handling their finances?
From the business, in terms of operations, so the kids come to the shop when it's school holidays. So they work as waiters because they're still young.
Yeah.
So the plan, that we've spoken about as a collective is that once they get to like 18, 20, then I put them in the kitchen so that they can understand how the business operates. The saying, how your kids will at some point stop listening to you and they watch what you're doing, So I'm also, as much as we don't sit down and say, oh, I'm doing X, Y, Z, but when there is, for example, the shop in Durban, I sit them down and say, guys, the shop is not working. I'm closing it for the following reasons, Oh, guys, they call me Ntate. Ntate is opening a shop, and this is the reason. The current shop in Bram, we're opening a cocktail bar upstairs, And the reason was that, guys, I'm opening a cocktail bar because you want to capture the audience for a longer period. So they can eat, but if they want to drink and want music, they can enjoy, So we have those conversations as much as it's not formalized, but they understand every other thing that I do.
You are listening to More Than Money, a podcast collaboration brought to you by Sasfin Wealth. At Sasfin Wealth, we empower our clients to reach their global investment goals, to retire with dignity, and to leave a lasting legacy. If you would like to have real money conversations, visit sasfin.com/wealth and talk to us. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
So let's talk about your mom for a little bit, because it sounds like she had a lot of influence on you. How did she handle her own money? Were there some things that she told you perhaps? Did you see her stressing out a little bit with money growing up? And how did that affect you?
I never really saw her, but you could pick up from, hey, go ask Mamang to borrow us money, you know.
Yeah.
So and so owes me money, go get it. But over and above that, I also understood that this person was working a 9 to 5. But over the weekends, it'll be she's selling shoes, she's selling either towels or whatever that she was selling.
Yeah.
And I'd be equally responsible for helping it. So at some point, it was that we need to sell X amount of products in order to make enough money for me to get to school. So those conversations weren't as blatant as this is what the issue is, but you could pick up as well to say, cool, we need to sell in order for me to go to school. I mean, the crazy story is that when apartheid ended, I guess in inverted commas, we then were able to go to white schools. So I stay in Thokoza and I have to commute every day from home to school and back and forth. And at some point, I was responsible for selling spices and dashboard sprays in order for me to generate enough money, taxi fare. Do you get what I mean? So from back then, I understood, okay, cool. In order for me to get somewhere, you gotta work for it, you know. So as much as it didn't verbally or explicitly say, hey, harana chelete or whatever, I understood, or in order for me to help her, I need to do X, Y, Z. And that's why the question earlier was around what conversations do you have with your siblings?
Yeah.
And it was based on that you gotta work for something in order to get it.
In your career, what are some of the tips that you've used from being a marketer to your business currently?
Administratively, you know, I guess administratively. So there's a lot of planning, you know, that you plan. Okay, cool, I'm going to open, for example, a shop.
Yeah.
You know, with that, there's got to be an email, there's got to be invoicing, keep the invoice, you know, because this is now what you do as a marketing manager. So company gives you budget to say promote product X, you know, and with that, you need to be accountable to somebody. So I think I've learned that as well. I need to be accountable for myself as well. You'll see 100,000 coming in as a businessman, but based on my understanding of how corporate works, you have to save some for the rainy day. You know, corporate also teaches you how to conduct business, like emails, the engagements when you sit in boardrooms with people. Maybe this time you're hustling them to try and get something from them, but you also understand how corporates work. Who do you need to approach? How do you need to handle relationships? So it is some of the stuff that I've learned from corporate that I'm applying in my own business.
Oftentimes when people think about corporate, it's like, the money they give you, you know, all of those things. And yet I find that people who started in corporate and branch out on their own, they normally are very, you know, they know how to work on time. They know how to speak the language and be accountable. So I don't think anything's ever lost by working in corporate. And I think there are so many lessons that you can learn in corporate.
100%. I always say that my biggest lessons post-varsity came from working at SAB.
Yeah.
You know, so, I mean, you come fresh out of varsity. You have to deal with Ausmaki, for example, that owns the tab.
Yeah.
So what you've learned, you need to now make it relatable, and which is what marketing is about. You get what I mean? So yes, we see the product advertised, but how do you then make it relatable to someone that is a consumer? It's also how you conduct yourself, you know, and corporate will teach you that. They'll teach you like reporting. And those are things that because you've learned it, you take those things adopted and make them your own in your business.
Yeah. For a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, when you get that first big check, did you have the temptation to go splurge a little bit, or you were disciplined enough to say, okay, I know this money is for what, I need to reinvest?
You know the crazy thing? When I really got first big check, I opened another shop. So I didn't blow it. Look, maybe I blew parts of it, but it was sneakers. So I never bought big ticket items, you know. So we opened the shop rather, in 2017. So we struggled. 2017, when we opened, 2018 was also difficult because it's like a new thing, you know. It's a new thing and people don't know it. But an incident happens in Braamfontein. So our biggest competitor, which at the time was a company called Smokehouse, you know. So Smokehouse, the owner posts something, you know, racist remarks of him being somewhere. So mind you, we come from a business where we're struggling, right? And our biggest competitor is always clapping us, you know. There's always paid to a point where I was looking for a job in 2018 because like, I got kids, I got a wife, and now this business isn't working. So I go find a job and I get offered this job. So I speak to my mother, and my mother's like, no, but did you sacrifice everything else? And this guy posts this thing and social media goes wild, you know? And there's a popular doctor on social media. He's like, no, don't worry, there's a black-owned wing place in Bram. And just like that, our fortunes turn, you know? And now, going back to your question of a big check. So now come end of the year 2018, we solid, money was sharp, you know? We good. And for me, it was always the next thing. How am I building for the future? And to your point, I took that money and I opened the shop in Pretoria. And in 2019, after we opened the shop and when the money came with COVID, I opened another cocktail bar. So I've always when the picture comes, I always look for the next.
Again, let's talk about that moment when you just felt like, you know what, I've tried this thing, it's not working. What did that feel like?
It's a deep feeling of regret, you know, like you've sacrificed a lot, you know, you've sacrificed your job, you've sacrificed your car, you know, you've sacrificed this decent paycheck to be an entrepreneur. And now things aren't working out. And you must remember, as much as an entrepreneur, you're also a husband, a father. So I think at some point it got to that to say, you know what, I've tried it, maybe it's not for me, you know, and that's when I started looking for a job. Fortunately, I got a job, but I think it was at that point where, do I really quit? You can make ends meet, or do I really hold on for just a bit longer?
How do you just say, okay, let me try one more day?
Here's the crazy thing. You know, when you're a parent, there's people that are looking at you. You know, there's people that look at you to say, how's he doing? Because I always say they're my board of directors. I need to now explain to them, why am I closing this thing? Why am I quitting this thing? You know, and for me, it's always been, I'm doing this thing for my kids, you know, and not only their business, but the lessons that come with how do you hold on to something? How do you not give up, you know? And I think it is just that, you know, that I look at it and I'm like, hey, my mother's dependent on this thing. A lot of other people, I mean, I got a total of 25 plus staff members. So if I quit, what then happens to them and their family? It's a whole network of people. So I think that in itself, you look back and like, cool, it's difficult. Maybe I can quit, but you then think, no, man, there's other people that are dependent on me.
That's a heavy load though.
100%. But it also motivates you to say, you know what?
Yes, absolutely.
Maybe let me not quit just yet. Something will come through. And half the time it does come through. In fact, not half the time, it always comes through. You know, always comes through. Be like, no man, hey, this business is not doing well, let me close it. It's a tricky thing, you know. Do you quit? Do you not quit? But I've always believed in the notion, you know, what's on the other side of giving up.
Sure.
You know, because it's not easy. I mean, anything in life is not easy.
Yeah, even working is...
Nothing is easy.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
No one said it's a given that you'll be the successful guy in G. Your things will move smoothly.
Moving smoothly for you.
Never, you know. And sometimes I have to sit back and say, okay, sharp, I've gotten this far with a 5,000 Rand investment that is a gazebo token, you know, and I've built this thing. So if I quit now, you know, because there's no ceiling
so much
for
momentum
me.
Also.
Do you get what I mean? There's no ceiling for me. I literally come from the bottom. I come from building this thing with my bare hands, you know? And for me to build this thing from a gazebo, events, markets, and for me to quit when we are 3-4 stores in.
Wouldn't make sense.
Do you get what I mean?
Yeah,
so keep going, you know? I love that. You know, even if it means we sacrifice one or other thing, then I always do it now. And maybe that's the worst thing. I always do it. I mean, over the last 6 months, I've traded in about 3 or 4 of my cars. Look at the cost, like, who's not working, let me trade this and get another one. Just so that we keep going, because you can't give up. You can't. It's really not an option.
So with everything that you've learned so far, what are some of your fears about money still?
So I love nice things and nice things love me. So, and I'm like, hey, I don't want to be broke, you know, and that's why. So for example, you come from Tlhompho, you know, you've had to taxi, you've had to struggle with your mother, and now you are your own man, you know. You can walk into a bank and say, hey man, I want to buy that BM, and the bank's like, sharp, Mr. Mokoena, 3 months bank statement approved, you know what I mean? Like, it's a nice feeling. And my fears about money is being unable to do that, you know? And my kids are, I hope they're not listening, my kids are spoiled, you know? And they always say, Tata, now there's this prime thing that is going on, you know? So they always come through and like, hey, I want to try this thing, I want this thing, you know? Can you buy me this? Can you buy me the sneakers? Can you buy, you know?
How do you normally respond to that?
Look, there's certain things where you like, guys, come to the shop over the holidays and work for it. And there's certain things that, you know what, I've worked so hard and my kids deserve it. There you go. You know, so my fear is always that, I don't want to get to a point where they want all these things, because we also, as parents, these kids are accustomed to what we always try and do for them, you know? So I don't want to get to a point where I want to do stuff for them and I can't, you know? And that's why I generally sacrifice the small things, I mean, which is the cars, the what, you know, so that the liquidity and the me being the parent that I am and the businessman that I am carries on.
What are your lessons that you've taught them about saving, about obviously investing? Do you see that they try to save it a little bit, but, you know, do they use that language?
They do. I mean, I give them an allowance, you know, so they save it, but kids being kids, sometimes they spend it, you know. But one thing I do love about them is that they always make a plan, you know. In this case, the plan is always me and the Wing Republic. And I'm hoping that teaches them, or if you want something, whether it's through the family business or any other way, you just need to consider, oh, let me wash your check because I'll get X amount of money. And now they've learned those things, you know, even when you ask them for a small favor. I walk the dogs. Are you going to pay me? You know? So they understand that you work, you get paid. They've learned those things, you know, in terms of how you move within the real world.
You and your wife, how do you handle finances with running a family, a business? Is it something that you talk about? Are you guys comfortable talking about money?
I hope I don't get into trouble. So my wife is very strict, you know. She's very strict in the sense that, have you considered this? Have you considered that? And now I'm like, let's get it. Let's buy it, you know. But one thing I love about her, you know, is she'll always bring me down to it to say, cool, have you considered X? You know, sometimes when you're an entrepreneur and you're a boss, running your own thing, no one really questions you. No one really holds you accountable. And I can literally wake up today and buy shoes and walk around with them, go shop home, and no one will ask. But mom's like, why are you buying this thing? Have you considered those things, you know? We don't need a new car. We don't, you know what I mean? So we do sit around and talk about money. But it's also with the yin and the yang, really. You know, she's more conservative. She saves the money, and I always go to her when I'm broke. So she saves a lot of money, you know. But even as an entrepreneur, you need someone as a sounding board to say, don't do X. Because I'm sure, as much as I'm like, I've saved, I'm sure if she wasn't there, I would have just blown more money than I should. So when it comes to finances, it's great in that sense, because she always holds me accountable in terms of, have you spent money and why have you spent X amount of money? Oh, I want to buy this thing. Like, no, we can't buy that thing. As much as you know you can afford it, she's like,
Was it always easy to talk about money with her in the beginning of your relationship?
Yeah, it's always been an easy thing. I mean, both of us, our backgrounds are really the same, you know. So we understand what it's like being in the township. We understand what it's like being raised by a parent, you know, like a single parent and a grandmother. You know? So we understand both of us. So it's always been easy. And I think because we've been together for so long, we've always wanted to grow together, you know?
So there was a vision amongst you and say, how do we
do it together? Yeah. I mean, we met in varsity, I think we're 21 or something.
Yeah.
And we understand each other.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
So if you think about everything that you've done so far, what would you want your kids, your wife, the people around you, your staff, how would you want them, or actually, maybe even better question, when you're not there, how do you think they speak about you?
I think with my kids adore me. I think my kids, you know, so they always see me as superhero and so, you know, so that box is chill. I know my wife loves me to bits, so that's, and my mom as well. But with the staff, they know I'm not as strict as I should, because I've always said to them that treat it like it's your own, you know, because all of us know that it feeds all of us here, you know. So I'd like to think that I'd like to think when they talk about me, Tlhompho is very cool, sharp. But if you get on the wrong side, then, hey, we have a problem.
Thank you so much for opening up. Thank you so much for being here. And I wish you nothing but success.
Thank you so much, Keleboa.
This was a Sasfin Wealth podcast. Visit sasfin.com/wealth for more information.